Good morning, everybody. It's really wonderful to be together this morning. So up here in our Zendo in the Boston area, in our regular sitting, we sit for a while, and then we have what we call Dharma dialogue. And Dharma dialogue is whatever's coming up for any member of the Zendo that they feel could be helpful to others, they put out there. And we have a little discussion before our next round of sitting. So this past Thursday night, and we settle on something and we really try to get into it. And what we settled on was intimacy. Uh-huh. And so remembering that I was going to be spending time with everyone here this morning, I thought I'd keep that conversation going. Intimacy. And maybe we'll start with an old Zen story, an old Zen koan. It's the story of a monk. And this is in China a long time ago. And he hears that there is a deeply enlightened master who lives off in the mountain. So he goes off in search of this master and travels with great hardship and finally finds his way to the monastery, and he becomes a student of the master. And the months pass, and then a year passes, and he's working very hard doing many retreats. And 2 years pass, and he's hitting a tough patch. He's asking the question, why am I here? What is this all about? This master, I do admire him, but I'm not quite sure what this Zen thing is after 2 years. So he goes into the interview with the Zen master, and then he walks into the room. The master can tell there's something up. So the master says, "You have a question?" And the monk replies, "Yes, here is my question. What is it? What is it beneath those robes?" Pointing at the master's robes. Now, of course, what the question is, what is it all about? What is the essence of it? Why are we here? So the master leans toward him and says, intimacy. How can that be that this is what it's all about? So we didn't begin by talking about intimacy. We actually began by reading a quotation from one of the ancestors, one of the Western ancestors, one of my favorites, Soren Kierkegaard. Now, Kierkegaard, I have always thought, has a real affinity with Buddhism. And it's because for his very brief, he did not live very long, very intense life, he wrestled with the question that is the question at the heart of Buddhism. And that question is, what brings an end to suffering? Now, Kierkegaard didn't use the word suffering. He preferred the word despair. And there is a place in one of his books, The Sickness Unto Death, where in a few sentences, he tells you where he's arrived. These are those sentences. He says, "This then is the formula which describes the condition of the self when despair is completely eradicated." Quite a statement. The condition of the self when suffering is eradicated. He goes on and says, this is it. The self, by relating itself to its own self, and by, here's the crux, And by willing to be itself, the self is grounded transparently in the power which makes it. Now that's a little dense. That's a translation from the Danish of Kierkegaard. So I did a little translation of that paragraph into Zen language. And my translation goes like this. Every time we return to full presence by coming back to the breath or by any other means, every time we come back to full presence, we fulfill the vow to be utterly available to whatever is arising right now, and to be completely available to how the world is now and what the world needs from our particular life in this moment. In doing this, we forego all of our fantasies, all of our wishful thinking, all of our obsessions, all of our fears, all of our addictions. We give up any desire to be any self in any other self in any other place. We give up any desire to be different from what we actually are. When we do this, we become transparent before the great power. And whatever needs to flow through us flows. Dogen, the great Zen master Dogen, put it this way. To realize the way is to become intimate with all things. Now, I think the challenge in Kierkegaard's formula is that phrase by willing to be itself, by willing to be ourself. Complete self-acceptance. That's hard, isn't it? How many times in the last week have we wished to be somebody else or wished to be in a different place? Every excursion into envy is a refusal to be who we are. And that is Kierkegaard's pathway to despair, to suffering. To be intimate with everything that is arising for us, to accept completely just who we are and where we are and what we are, means that we do not get to pick or choose. Intimacy, true intimacy, doesn't pick or choose. It's not usually the way we think about it, is it? Oh, I'm going to be intimate with this person. This means intimacy with a quiet joy, intimacy with fear, intimacy with hot, intimacy with cold, intimacy with longing, with deep attraction, with loss, intimacy with shame. That's a tough one. Intimacy with the sun, intimacy with thunder, intimacy with our impatience, with our irritability, intimacy with beauty, with grief, with the discomforts of illness, intimacy with a steady love, with the harsh inner critic, intimacy with despair, with deep disappointment, with excitement, with hunger, intimacy with the rain. If we are faithful to our vow of intimacy, intimacy deepens. There's no end to intimacy, to what it can be. It deepens. Life becomes more intimate. Every moment gets a little bit closer. And more, we open onto an unaccepted vastness and realize everything we've been shutting out. Another quote from Dogen, who said, "Intimate means close and inseparable. There is no gap. Intimacy embraces Buddha ancestors," he says. It embraces you. It embraces the self. It embraces action. It embraces generations. It embraces merit. It embraces intimacy. There is no gap, he said. There is no gap. The brain makes up the gap. Everything is always in relationship. If you doubt this, do what I did last night. I watched my 6-year-old grandson devour a piece of chocolate birthday cake. No gap. It was hard to tell where the boy ended and the cake began. So we don't have to worry about closing the gap. There never was a gap. And why do we ever think there is one? Why do we ever think there's something between us and everything that's coming to us in the world? In the Garden of Eden, God said to Adam and Eve, who had been hiding because of their shame, they thought they were naked. Why do we choose not to be naked? God said to them, "Who said that you were naked?" Why is the devil afraid of intimacy? He's the one who told him. When we are in deep intimacy, the devil is out of a job. So just showing up here together, just keeping our vow together to come back to the breath, we continue this ancient practice of intimacy. Let's do a little bit here. Let's do 2 minutes of being intimate, of sitting together. Who is our bell ringer today? It's hard for me to tell from the screen. Amy, is that you? Amy, could you give us just 2 minutes? Ring a bell to bring us in and a couple of bells to ring us out. Let's spend 2 minutes together being intimate.